Hi, I'm Abby. I have a lot of records, and this is Vinyl Monday. So welcome back, or welcome if this is your first time here. This is the series where I sit down once a week and just talk about music that I love. As you could probably tell by the title of this video, we have a little bit of an exception to the mission statement of Vinyl Monday this week. I had never actually listened to this album in full before talking about it for this week's episode, but believe it or not, I was running out of ideas for Vinyl Monday, and I wanted something new that I hadn't really looked into before, from an artist that I hadn't really gotten into, and from an album that I've heard a lot about, but I had never actually investigated for myself. So this week we're covering Tommy by The Who. And let's take this out of the plastic. My copy is a repress from 1971, and this is a US copy. It was released on Decca Records over here, and released on Track Records over in the UK. This record was a part of a collection that I picked up my sophomore year of college, and I kept this album purely because one of the songs on here was featured in the movie Almost Famous, which getting into classic rock and vintage fashion, I was obsessed with that movie. I have an entire post about revisiting Almost Famous on my blog. That'll be linked in the description. I actually have in this sleeve right here, I have the note that the main character Will's sister left in the copy of Tommy that she gave to Will at the beginning of the movie. Made this for a little video on my Instagram a while back. This art was done by Mike McInerney, and he also created a booklet of images to go along with this album. B-roll Abby is gonna show all that to you. Let's open up the gatefold, which actually opens again. This middle piece right here would hold that booklet that I just mentioned, and the outer wings hold the two LPs. And my copy of Tommy actually has a couple quirks. As B-roll Abby will show you, sides 1 and 4 are on the same disc, with sides 2 and 3 on the other. So my pressing of Tommy was designed for automatic record players. From what I understand about these models, you would stack up the discs and then the player would play and flip them, well, automatically. That way you wouldn't have to worry about getting up to flip your own disc over if you had studying to do, if you had guests over. I have a couple other albums in my collection like this, and I don't know, it's just kind of a fun oddity of the time. The personnel on Tommy goes as follows. You have Roger Daltrey on vocals, Pete Townshend on guitar and vocals, John Entwistle on bass, French horn, and he contributed vocals too, and the legendary Keith Moon on drums. As the British mix all somehow knew David Bowie, all the British Keiths were just fucking nuts. The album was composed by Pete Townshend with some contributions by the other members, and the record was produced by Chris Stamp. Some say that Tommy was the first rock opera, and this assumption is actually false. There were other rock operas being made in 1967 and 68. However, Tommy was the first album advertised as a rock opera. So what is a rock opera? It is a concept album on drugs. Pete Townshend had been wanting to do a rock opera for a while, so he did mini ones first to test the water. These include a quick one while he's away, and by doing this, Pete built up a strategy as to how he would go about this whole rock opera thing on a grand scale. I mean, sure, there were concept albums and there were other rock operas out there, but nothing quite to the magnitude of this. The name Tommy was picked, firstly because it was a pretty common name, and secondly because it was a nickname for soldiers in World War II. As for the plot of Tommy, let's get into this. A mother gaslights her son Tommy into shutting off his senses of sight and hearing after he witnesses his dad killing his mom's lover. Yeah, real light fare to start off with. A therapist comes along claiming he can cure Tommy. Meanwhile, Tommy's mom is all like, "My child doesn't know what Christianity is. Lady, don't you have some bigger problems at hand? Your son is a witness of a murder." Tommy gets turbo-bullied by his cousin and abused by his uncle. The therapist's wife also doses Tommy with LSD, and we just never revisit that again. So being without sight and hearing, Tommy relies on his sense of touch and his incredible imagination. Through this, he becomes the best pinball player in the world. He regains his sight and hearing after being taken to a real doctor, and is shocked back into hearing and perceiving the world around him when his mother smashes the mirror he's been staring at out of frustration. So what does Tommy do with his newfound senses? He starts a religious movement, of course. Wait, Tommy starts a cult? And then he loses all his followers, and the album just ends. That's Tommy. So here's the thing. The plot summary of Tommy does not come from the record. You get almost none of this from listening to the album. A lot of what we know about the plot comes from this interview that Pete Townsend did with Rolling Stone magazine in 1968. He went on for over 10 pages about this album that wouldn't be out for another year. That's like the most Pete Townsend thing I've ever heard. He immediately regretted this. Now that he'd sort of spilt the beans, he felt like he had to write this album around what he'd said. And I gotta say, this interview explains the plot of Tommy better than the actual Tommy does. There were a lot of working titles for Tommy, but the one that Pete states in this interview and other interviews like this was Deaf, Dumb, and Blind Boy. The album was recorded at IBC Studios in London, and sessions lasted from September of 1968 to May of 1969. They took a break in the middle to perform at the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus, and they actually overshot their deadline by a month or two because they were still mixing the record. Sessions were often 12 plus hours long because, well, you can't make this up. They were just figuring out the plot as they went. And the track listing for this monster of a record goes as follows. The story of Tommy opens with Overture and It's a Boy. This is followed by You Didn't Hear It, also called 1921, and followed by Amazing Journey and Sparks. Then we have Eyesight to the Blind, also called The Hawker, which is a Sonny Boy Williamson cover. Then we have Christmas and Cousin Kevin, followed by Acid Queen, which is who I've decided to dress like today. This is the most Acid Queen thing I could come up with. I could do better than this, but it's literally 95 degrees and I am just not fucking with any more than this. And then, as we follow Tommy on his trip, we have the 10-minute epic Underture. This is followed by Do You Think It's Alright, Fiddle About, and Pinball Wizard. Then we have There's a Doctor and Go to the Mirror, Tommy Can You Hear Me, and Smash the Mirror. This is followed by Sensation and Miracle Cure. Then we have Sally Simpson, I'm Free, Welcome and Tommy's Holiday Camp, and the album finally closes with We're Not Gonna Take It. That is a lot of songs. The singles chosen were Pinball Wizard, I'm Free, and See Me Feel Me. Now, as you may have noticed from this track listing, See Me Feel Me is not a song on the record. Instead, it's a medley of the Overture and We're Not Gonna Take It. Pinball Wizard was definitely the most marketable tune on Tommy. It's since become one of the Who's greatest hits. And this is worth noting for someone who grew up in the late 2000s / early 2010s like I did. Pinball Wizard was performed on Glee. Thank you and I'm sorry, you're now all cursed with this information as well. Upon initial release, both fans and critics thought this was good, but it was also confusing. This was not at all helped by Pete Townsend continually trying to explain the plot of Tommy in interviews, but just making the plot more and more convoluted. And Tommy was famously played in full at a lot of The Who's shows from 1969 through 1970. They actually performed this in full at Woodstock. And from these couple of years, The Who become next level live performers. They were great to begin with, but this just takes them to the level of a must-see act. There was a film adaptation of Tommy. I haven't seen it yet, but what I do know about it is that Eric Clapton is in it, and he has one of the worst haircuts I've ever seen. It's not quite as bad as Peter Gabriel's reverse mohawk, but it's... And at the 1989 reunion concert, where they played Tommy in full once again, they had Elton John singing Pinball Wizard, and what is, in my opinion, a perfect casting choice, Billy Idol as Cousin Kevin. Billy Idol is literally who I pictured as Cousin Kevin when I was listening through this for the first time. And so just finding out that information was incredible. As I said in the beginning, this was my first time listening to Tommy in full. So what do I think? My first thought was, oh my god, there are a lot of songs. So going into Tommy, I didn't like the individual songs I'd heard, especially Pinball Wizard on classic rock radio. That song irritated me. I am picky about The Who's music. I do prefer 60s Who, which is ironic because I have almost exclusively 70s Who. I know we all praise Keith Moon to the sun and the stars, but there are some really good bass solos on Tommy. The leitmotifs on this one are great, especially the one that carries over from the overture, Pinball Wizard, and I'm Free. When I first heard the overture, I started singing Pinball Wizard at the Pinball Wizard part. And that's, in my book, a sign of a good arrangement. I really wanted to believe in the power of Pinball Wizard. I went in hoping that I would like it more in the context of the album than I do on classic rock radio, and that is exactly what happened. I am fully on board with Pinball Wizard now. And when I was getting ready this morning, kind of giving Tommy one last listen through before filming, I sang along to the song, which I'd never done before. It's super fun. Go to the Mirror is underrated as hell. I had that song stuck in my head for 2 whole days. And I like that Paul McCartney-inspired vocal moment on Sally Simpson. It's one of those things that once you hear it, you can't unhear it. So how does Tommy compare to my favorite rock opera, The Wall? I gotta say, it's interesting that The Who wrote for a character born in their parents' generation. Tommy was growing up in the 1920s and 30s, as opposed to The Wall, where Roger Waters writes a character from Pink Floyd's own generation. And just like The Wall, you gotta really be in the mood to listen to Tommy. And Tommy sets up quite a few tropes that we hear in The Wall, like the character acting and the leitmotifs. The Wall is better as a studio album, while Tommy is better live. This brings me into my next point. Tommy is way better live than it is on the record. I wasn't so sure about The Who, even through the initial research of Tommy. So I dug in a little deeper and I looked up some live performances. I watched the Coliseum performance and I watched Isle of Wight, and I was won over instantly. Keith's drumming is a lot more inventive in live iterations of Tommy. I find somehow he gets a little repetitive on the studio album, and that doesn't happen live. The whole group keeps things more fresh and interesting with this material in a live setting. And their incredible stage presence just adds a whole other layer to what you're hearing on the record. I am on the fence about how I feel about the narrative. I kind of feel like he tried to maybe smash two rock operas together. You have the arc of the story where Tommy regains his sight and hearing, and then you have the secondary arc where Tommy becomes a cult leader. You could do away with the Uncle Ernie character entirely. I skipped over all the Uncle Ernie songs my most recent time listening to this, and it didn't change the narrative at all. You literally will not miss anything. The cult leader arc isn't fleshed out quite as well as the sight and hearing arc, and I do feel like Pete Townsend really needed to get the narrative of Tommy straight and write it down on paper and have somebody go through it with a red pen in hand. Overall, the record definitely has its highs and lows. The high points for me are the overture and underture and the mirror arc, and the low points, Tommy's Holiday Camp. Tommy's Holiday Camp. It's not front-loaded or back-loaded or equal goodness the whole way through. Well, it's kind of front-loaded. I literally can't explain this any further. It's flawed, but it paved the way for the rock opera as we know it. I truly had no idea what to think going into this album. In the end, I'm really glad that I listened to it, because this got me big into The Who. I really dig The Who now, and it's all thanks to Tommy. My personal favorites are the Overture, 1921, Amazing Journey and Sparks, Acid Queen and Underture, Pinball Wizard, and Go to the Mirror. Whew. This record is a doozy, and that is this week's episode of Vinyl Monday. Please comment below what you think of Tommy and what you think of this period of The Who's music. I love hearing what you guys have to say about this stuff, and I know people are gonna have some strong opinions about this album. And if you like what I do here, you should like this video and subscribe to my channel. I post Vinyl Mondays every Monday morning at 11 a.m. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye!